Good afternoon. It's so wonderful to see you all here. I want to thank you for joining today's conversation with our 2023 Bicentennial Medalists. The Bicentennial Medal was first awarded in 1993 on the college's 200th anniversary. Through it, the Society of Alumni and the college honor alumni for their distinguished achievements in various fields. This year, we've chosen to honor 6 alumni who've made diverse and extraordinary contributions to the fight for educational access and civil rights. As you can imagine, with 6 panelists, we'll be covering a lot of ground today. My goal is to give them time to each share a little bit of their ideas, while also ensuring time for you to ask them some questions of your own. So let me begin by briefly introducing everybody, and then we'll get into the conversation. And as I read your name, please just raise your hand so they can know which one you are. I begin with Phil Geier from the class of 1970, who's a leader in international education and who founded and serves as the director of the Davis United World Scholars Program, the world's largest privately funded scholarship program for undergraduates. He also founded and ran for several years the Davis Projects for Peace Initiative, a program that awards grants to undergraduates to pursue global projects and promote peace. Welcome, Phil. I turn next to the Honorary Anita Earls from the class of 1981, who is a career civil rights lawyer and who has served as a justice on the North Carolina Supreme Court since 2019. Her focus as a litigator was to protect voting rights and educational civil rights, and in 2007, she founded the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, a civil rights nonprofit group. I'm also pleased that Anita will be our convocation speaker tomorrow. Welcome, Anita. Rebecca Hiley from the class of you all sound in order after all. So, from the class of 1986 is the executive director of Ethiopia Education Initiatives, a nonprofit that works to provide educational opportunities for talented Ethiopian students. Its flagship initiative, the Haile Manus Academy, opened in 2021 and will serve 400 high school students. Haile is a consultant at the Foros Group, as well as chairman of the board of Emily's List and on the Beerley School Board as well. Welcome. I see you didn't sit in order. Bob is next. So Bob Kim from the class of 1992 is the executive director of the Education Law Center, a nonprofit legal advocacy organization. A leading expert in education law and policy in the United States, he's been engaged in civil and education rights law and policy for his entire 25-plus year career. From 2011 through 2016, he served in the Obama administration as Deputy Assistant Secretary in the U.S. Department of Education Office for Civil Rights, which enforces federal civil rights laws in K-12 and post-secondary institutions worldwide, or nationwide. Welcome, Bob. And I'm going to introduce you two together, Robbie Baer and Matthew Swanson, both from the class of 1997. They are a wife and husband, illustrator, and author duo who've become critically acclaimed children's book authors. Along with their 4 children, they spent the last year traveling the country in a combination school bus and tiny home, visiting Title I schools in all 50 states, plus Washington, D.C. Their visits included presentations on creativity and collaboration, and they also gave away more than 25,000 hardcover books to students and teachers from underserved communities through a program called Busload of Books. They also collected data from their visits for a major research project and are creating a picture book about America in their efforts to support students in underfunded schools and bring change to our educational system as a whole. Welcome, Robbie and Matthew. What a panel. Thank you all for being here. As a way to get started, I want to talk about the issue of educational opportunity in this country. The topic, of course, isn't new, but it's certainly occupying more public attention right now than it has in a long time. Some of that is certainly the result of last June's Supreme Court decision on race college admissions. And so we're going to get into the questions, focusing broadly and touching on that ultimately if there's time. Before we get into that meaty topic, I'm naturally interested in learning a little bit more about you in your own words through your time here at Williams. So I'm wondering if each of us could tell you what you studied here and maybe just talk a bit about one of your favorite classes if you had to choose one. And maybe we'll just go straight down the line.
Thanks, Maud. Great to be here, and congratulations to all of you. I was an MCiv major. A couple of professors who were influential in my life were Fred Rudolph, whose two daughters are in the audience today, and Russ Bostard, who was the diplomatic historian on the faculty. I would be remiss if I didn't say there were a million other mentor-like figures on the campus during my time. I also learned a sense of humor from a bunch of them, not as well as I would have liked, but you know, the personalities were amazing. But one of the things that I would highlight from my time in the tumultuous 60s was the introduction in the curriculum of the 414. You won't believe this. Well, Jack Wadsworth will remember this. But there are a few in this audience who will remember that there was a two-semester curriculum with no winter study program. And in my freshman year, fall of 1966, I had, count them, 6 8 o'clocks a week, Monday to Saturday. And as a good Catholic, I had an 8 o'clock on Sunday. It was a tough year. But I underscore the winter study program on purpose because for me, and just to your point about its impact, it created freedom of thought and action, and it also got me out of Williamstown a few times. Not that being in Williamstown is not good, but learning how to get out of Williamstown is also a trick. So I spent my winter study of note in East Palo Alto, across 101 from Stanford University, and worked in an all-black community in a community service program. And it incited for me a lot of things that I didn't realize were happening to me later on, but I give a big, and I think our class in its 50th year fundraising was focused on the winter study. I know it's contentious as an academic undertaking, but I believe, and I've watched the last 50 years of education unfold, that experiential nature of education has infiltrated the academy to the better. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Anita.
Yes, good afternoon. I am truly honored to be here, and thank you. It's incredible to be amongst such a distinguished group of alumni. I will say that Williams really did represent an incredible educational opportunity for me. I came from a family, I was the first one in my family to have the opportunity to go to a 4-year institution. When my father, who was black, finished high school, there was no school in Missouri that would accept him as a student. And so for my family, this chance to send me off to a place like Williams was an incredibly momentous thing for me and for my family. The course that I remember the most and that had the biggest impact on my life is a course that I did not get credit for. It was not graded, and I'm not telling you only because my professor is here today. It's really true that Professor Charles Payne, at that time fairly early in his career, agreed to teach some of us on Saturdays about his research into the civil rights movement and learning about the era, the early 60s, and the young people who led that movement at that time has stayed with me throughout my career, and so that was an amazing opportunity, and thank you, Professor Payne.
Thank you very much. That's wonderful. Why don't we go just right down the row here? So, Bob, you want to go next?
Good afternoon. It's great to be here. I will say I was when I was at Williams, I was an English and Asian Studies double major. So I read lots of several hundred-page 19th century fiction works and spent a lot of time in the language lab studying Japanese, and I did a study abroad in Tokyo for a year, so it was just a tremendous learning experience in that way. But I actually was thinking back to what was so, one course and that influenced me. And I'll say something completely different from my major, which was a music theory course. I came to Williams thinking I knew something about music. I was in the Berkshire Symphony, and I was a member of an a cappella group here called the E-Flats. Yeah, any E-Flats here, former? Okay. But the music theory class did what Williams is so great at doing, which is it takes something you think you know, and it makes you uncomfortable about it. And so here I was learning about the space between notes and progression of chords and having to sing from reading notes, which I had never done before. And it was a great learning experience and something that I carry with me today, whether listening to music from either Bach or Beyonce or whatever. Beyonce was not born when I took this course. So that's my answer.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, and hello, everyone. I was an English major, and I enjoyed that. And the courses that I enjoyed the most besides that were the sort of traditional introductory courses like Art History or Religion 101. Those feel to me that they exposed me to ideas about humanity and connection and symbol and all of the things that have come up in my life very often. So I appreciated those. But when I was thinking about this, really, what I took most from Williams is not really academic. When I thinking about this panel, I was 17 when I showed up, and I probably checked off every single box for. I'd only lived in the US for 6 years. I'd come from a big public school in Minnesota. I hadn't even done any of the thinking about identity and race and all of those other things. So what I'm really grateful to Williams for, and I think this ties to our later conversation about diversity and how we support students who view themselves as outsiders. I would not have thought of myself as an outsider back then, but I reflect on it and I see it now. And what I'm mostly grateful for is the time that allowed me to do the social, emotional learning and the personal growth. And that is really due very much to the friends that I made here, many of whom are out there. Nice. And that is really the gift that Williams gave me and the thing that I'm most grateful for, the friendships and the time to grow in a way. I think, kids who come to college are still kids, and it takes a long time to grow. So that's what I'm most grateful for.
Lovely, thank you.
I'm Matthew Swanson. I came to Williams thinking I was a great poet, maybe the greatest living American poet not yet published. And so I was an English and religion major, and my most meaningful class was either my intro poetry seminar with Larry Robin, which I learned I was not even a sort of slightly good poet. I was a terrible poet. I should not write poems, or my intro seminar with Jim Shepard in fiction, where I learned that maybe that was a better place to spend my energy. Jim is this perfect combination of brilliant and hilarious. And so he was able to teach us what was wrong with our stories while making us laugh. And I think that's one of the most important lessons I've learned, is how to use humor as a tool to make people comfortable, advance understanding, create connections. So I'm so grateful to him. I turn it over to you, Robbie. What was your favorite class here?
I'm Robbie Bear. I'm Matthew's wife.
There you go.
I just want you to know that his application essay was 4 pages.
We don't talk about this, Robbie.
Iambic pentameter about himself. So like.
Phil Smith may have read that poem, and the fact that you admitted me to Williams in spite of that is really poor judgment on your part, my friend. I'm sure. All right. Talk about you, Robbie. Talk about you.
So I was an English and art major, and I also fulfilled the requirements for art history, so I really liked the humanities a lot. And I think probably my most memorable class was a tutorial that I took with Steve Levin. He's a painter, and at the time his daughter, I think, was 3 years old, and he would meet us out at, another student and I were the only people in the class. He would meet us out at the Clark, and he'd be pushing Cleo along in her little stroller, and we'd go through the Clark, and when we saw something interesting, we'd stop, and he'd like deconstruct each painting for us. He'd be like, here's what they're doing, this is you can see a little bit of the underpainting showing through here, and it was fascinating. It was like the best way to learn how the masters do it. And then our actual classroom was like a dingy room in the basement of West that, so it was a student room, I guess. It was a dorm room that, it couldn't find a place for us to have a painting studio. So that's where it was. And it was kind of like an amazing mix of high and low. I loved it. So yeah.
Wonderful, thank you all. So we're going to turn now to the content of our panel. I'll mix it up a little, Bob. I thought I'd start with you. But it is a general question for the whole panel. And what I'm interested in is having you talk a little bit about what drew you to your work, but also if there's an accomplishment or aspect of which you're most proud, and what do you see as the big challenges that you face in moving forward your priorities in the work? And Bob, let's start with you.
Oh, I have to use the mic. I work in public education, advocacy, and civil rights. I think what drew me to the work was, I'm a product of public education. I grew up attending K-12 public schools, which were amazing. I didn't know it at the time, but they enabled me to attend a school like Williams College, which is no small feat. So I think that was, and it was attending public education, but then when I graduated from Williams in '92, there was a book that many of you may have read by Jonathan Kozol called Savage Inequalities. It documented just the extreme disparities in the quality and condition of education for children who live in poverty versus children from wealth or privilege in this country, and just how different the educational experience was. And this is government-provided education, you know, it should be equal, right? Absolutely not. And then my first job out of Williams was working in New York City at the Department of Juvenile Justice, which was, I worked for the general counsel there, so I kind of learned how to become a lawyer, but the agency was in charge of housing and educating youth from very early age, 10 years old through 16 or 17, who were being either adjudicated or tried as juvenile delinquents or juvenile offenders. Some of them were even being tried as an adult at the time, 13 years old. And I looked in the detention center, and there were hundreds of children. They were all black and brown. And so just something got kindled in me about my own upbringing and the juxtaposition in what I was seeing from these kids and what their futures were likely to look like. Not only was their education interrupted while being detained, but their futures were likely irrevocably compromised, in many ways. And so I think that set of experiences and reflecting on my own path and just that difference, I think is what led me to what I do.
Thank you. Rebecca, do you want to answer?
Yes. So the work I do now is lead this school in Ethiopia, which the idea, as you said at the outset, is to bring quality education to students of talent. And what drew me there? I'm very proud that we've established it. Building a school from scratch in 4 years in a developing country during COVID and a civil war is quite the accomplishment. But what drew, I've never been, follow your passions. That really hasn't worked for me. What I really found myself happy doing, because I think that many of us are good at a lot of different things, but what's exciting for me or what makes me happy is finding a place that's at the intersection of what I feel is needed and what I feel that I can do well. There's no question that a school of this sort is hugely needed. Ethiopia has a population of 120 million people, 60 million of them 18 and younger. So really, it is one of the countries that's going to matter going forward, so getting it right is key. And for me, am I able to do it well? Thanks to Williams and other Harvard later, I feel like I got the skills about critical thinking and analysis that allows me to figure out how to do it well. And then fortunately for me, because I have roots there, I'm particularly able to do it well there. So it's a great combination of service, which is what I was interested in, a way that feels important and feels that I can do well.
Thank you. Robbie and Matthew, you want to weigh in?
We got into doing what we're doing, which is creating books because we like to make stuff, and we like to make stuff together.
It was very selfish.
But we found pretty quickly once we started publishing children's books that we would get invited to elementary schools, and it was great. We'd go into the school and the kids would have fun and they'd get excited about reading and creativity, and it was wonderful, except all the schools that invited us had lots of resources already. They were private schools, they were well-funded public schools, and there were a host of kids in this country and in our own community who weren't getting these opportunities. So we live in a beautiful seeming town looks a lot like Williamstown, but our public elementary school, 88% of the kids qualify for free or reduced lunch, live below the poverty level, and our kids' school is not going to be able to afford an author visit.
They can't afford to have an author visit. So we sort of said to ourselves, well, that's an easy thing for us to do, is to just do a free author visit for these kids. And the school was very excited. Yes, you can do it. We can do a book fair, and the kids can come buy your books. And we said, well, I know these kids. These kids are not going to be buying the books. They don't have the money for the books. So why don't we figure out a way that we can give books to all of the kids? So we thought it was going to be, several months of fundraising, but we said we could do it. And in about 36 hours, we raised money for all of the books for all of the kids. So it meant that there were people interested in helping, and this was just a way for people to help. So that's how we started. And
and getting to what Bob was saying about the
Yeah.
inequality. I mean, people point their fingers at our nation's public schools and the teachers and the test scores and all the things that aren't going right and that these are terrible schools. They're not. The bigger problem that our education system rests on is systematic poverty in this country, and our public schools have to take all the students in the community, no matter what problems they bring to school, and poverty creates conditions of food insecurity, homelessness, emotional and social abuse, truancy, addiction problems. Our public schools in this country, 51% of our nation's public school students come from low-income backgrounds, are dealing with problems that are way beyond their training or job description or resource base. So, I mean, in terms of the larger problem that we're facing as we do this work is we can't solve the big problem. We can't solve it ourselves.
we can't, we're not even really addressing the big problem.
We're trying
So
to
we
create...
need to address the big problem before we can solve the problem of education, of public education that sits on top
The
of it.
thing we can do is create some enrichment opportunities for kids that are not going to have them otherwise. So
Right.
we spent a
So
year
that's where
doing
we
that,
started.
and it was incredibly rewarding.
Yeah.
So
Thank
anyway.
you. Anita.
So I think I always wanted to be a lawyer. For 30 years of my career, I was a civil rights attorney representing plaintiffs in a wide range of types of civil rights cases. But my passion for, and there's a variety of issues that I've worked on, including voting rights and representing families of people who are killed by police officers, but for education and the importance of educational opportunities. I actually, in high school, believe it or not, went down to the Seattle Public School Board and told them they needed to do more to integrate our high schools. I don't know why I thought they would listen to me. And it probably ended up getting them sued, so there you go. But so from a very early age, and then I was able to go to the law firm that generated Julius Chambers and the Swan versus Charlotte Mecklenburg, the great U.S. Supreme Court decisions that somewhat advanced the ball and opened up opportunities. What I found was that my career has been about trying to prevent backsliding and erosion of all of those precedents. And so what I can say, and I had an amazing opportunity to work at the Justice Department during the Clinton administration, where one of my sections was educational opportunities. So I got to see how the federal government was working on school desegregation decrees across the country, and how educational opportunities, how the federal government at that time was trying to impact those. But now, what I can say as an accomplishment, it's been a losing battle, to be honest. But I guess I'm proud of having created an organization to do this work in the South, so that hopefully the next generation of civil rights litigators can have more success than I did.
Thank you. Phil.
First of all, I just want to say, from the perspective of working mostly in higher education and secondary education, that the younger problems are the big problems. By the time they get to us, it's beyond us, really. So I really commend the bus drivers on the panel here. So I thought I was going to follow sort of in Fred Rudolph's footsteps a little bit. Ended up getting a PhD, got my first job at a liberal arts college, Dickinson College in Carlisle, PA. And no sooner had we had a baby than we got the big fat envelope from Washington saying, would we like to move to Paris, and would I like to be a lecturer at the Sorbonne for a year? And so we moved to Paris. The anti-American rhetoric and feelings were so strident, and I was sort of self-critical anyway, that it gave me great pause about what I was doing and what could I do better about it. And so after that Fulbright year, I basically said, I don't really think the academic context is the best route for me to put my energies into, maybe enhancing cross-cultural communication among peoples who are different from each other. So basically for the last 30 plus years, in one form or another, my efforts have been to do just that. And I've been very fortunate to understand also that change comes from resource development, and in a variety of nonprofit sectors, the underachievement is the result of a failure to invest in great ideas and great people. So what I've spent most of my last 25, 30 years is enhancing educational opportunities for a diversity of the world. We have about kids from 160 countries coming to places across this country, including Williams, 4,200 of them right now on 100 campuses from the East Coast to the West Coast. And what's happened is not just transformational for those individual kids, which is a microcosmic and hardly sort of taps the surface of the problem we're talking about, but it challenges institutions, including Williams, to ask itself, what is the composition of the student body we want to have in the classroom that then, not just the classroom, the dorms, the labs, the playing fields, in which those conversations, those relationships, the community around those campuses, how can all that be transformational for the individual, for the institution, and ultimately for the work that each of those individuals do when they leave that institution? So the connectivity, the relationship building, the opportunity that that education provides. So I really value a place like Williams more than I probably appreciated when I came here, as a place at which those relationships can flourish. And I believe that they are succeeding not only just for the individual students that are here, but for the communities around them and then for the communities they return to. So let's hope there's some leverage in all of this.
Lovely, thank you. So why don't we dig in a little further through the K to 12 part of this story. Obviously, you all work in different areas, but maybe Robbie and Matthew, we could just build a little bit on what you were saying before when you noted that poverty is really the significant issue that is affecting that arena. And I'm wondering, from your time on the road and your engagement in the younger parts of the educational spectrum, if you think there's anything higher education can learn at this point from what's going on, or ways in which this sort of journey through the educational system can be informed by what's happening at the beginning.
I mean, I think one of the things that is important to know is that higher ed, places like Williams and the elite colleges, and I guess most colleges, feel like they're getting the best and the brightest. They are getting the ones who most successfully navigated the system that is in place for us, the people who have successfully navigated it, right? It is not a system that is set up to accommodate students, kids who have a parent who's working multiple jobs, because they need to make ends meet. They have to stay at home. They have to look after their younger sibling all day long. They're not able to get regular meals. They come to school hungry. All of these things are interruptions to a regular, successful day in the classroom. And we have treated children as if they are supposed to show up in the classroom ready to go without bringing any of the baggage that real life is throwing them. So I think one of the things that we have to realize is that once, like you said, Phil, once they're in high school, it's too late. They've already gone on their path. And a lot of the best and the brightest are probably working at their local McDonald's because that is the biggest that they can imagine for themselves, and that we have imagined for them.
Robbie and I both worked at the admission office I worked at the admission office for 5 years with Phil. Nice to see you, Phil. After graduation, and Robbie read applications and did interviews. And I know from firsthand experience how important it is to Williams to seek out socioeconomic diversity, first-generation college students. It's been a priority of the colleges for a long time. The number of students in the class correct me if I'm wrong, I think has been about 20% for a number of years. It's a great start. But I think that colleges in general have to continue to invest in bringing people whose perspectives on the issue of poverty, whose background and experiences, not growing up in wealth and privilege, to the table. Because if our colleges and universities are the place where these conversations are happening and these partnerships are forming and connections are being made, this issue has to be represented. People who understand how to talk about this and solve these problems and think critically have to be there at the table, and colleges need to do more to represent people from this type of diverse background. And it'll become an even more important metric in the wake of the Supreme Court decision for creating the type of diversity that's going to enrich the classrooms and the dialogue here. So, thank you.
Bob, I wonder if from your perspective of working in the intersections between civil rights law and education, you have some thoughts on the question of how the legal system is working to foster, to continue to give educational access and to address some of the issues that they've raised.
Sure. Well, I guess I'll start by addressing that question by just making an observation about public education in this country, you know, K-12 education. Unlike, as you all know, unlike other industrialized nations, wealthy nations, the United States doesn't really have a national education system. We have thousands of education systems around the country, and what that means is that every state does its own thing, provides its own funding and resources for schools, and then every district makes do with what the state gives, and the federal government contributes a little bit, 8 or 9%, and then the local districts add a lot of the resources from local property taxes and so forth. And so this is an issue legally because the federal government in 1973, the Supreme Court said, we're actually not going to deal with this problem. There's no fundamental right to an education as far as the US Constitution is concerned. This is primarily a state issue. So no equal protection issues as far as the Supreme Court was concerned. And then so it goes down to the state level. So we have dramas going on in all 50 states around public education, whether you have a right to a good one and how much. I look to my colleague here to my right, Justice Earls, who's, I just have to give you some props because she is a pioneer and a true exemplar in sort of this struggle for decent public education, and even in the North Carolina Supreme Court on which she sits, you know, recently issued one of the most astounding, remarkable decisions of the last several decades on public education, and enshrining that there is a right under North Carolina's laws to a high quality public education, and really just saying that the state needs to pony up, you know, the funds for that. There's been some issues, which I won't go into, since that ruling of several months ago, but I think that the legal profession and the law can do some of the work here. It's a state-by-state battle, and we have several issues going on. It's not only public school finance litigation and advocacy, it's trying to prevent education from being privatized in ways that just really siphon and drain taxpayer funds to private education, so it's more to the haves rather than the have-nots. And then we have the whole issue of discrimination and lack of equity and how students are being treated in schools. And so that's a whole another area of civil rights law, you know, disproportionate discipline and suspension and expulsion of kids of color, students with disabilities being tracked out of the system, and so forth and so on. So these are battles that are really being waged around the country, and it truly is an all-hands-on proposition right now, especially as you all know, that public education is under siege in so many different ways around the country, and something that we really have to grapple with. And I'm sure Justice Earls will agree with me in saying that the law can do so much, but it really takes an advocacy and consensus building among the public and legislatures to sustain and engender equality in the country. It doesn't happen just because of a lawsuit.
Maybe you'd like to weigh in on this as well.
Yeah, so what I can share is that the litigation he's talking about, the Leandro case, started over 25 years ago. The kids who were in school then who were establishing that they have a state constitutional right to a sound basic education, their kids have already graduated from schools, and the data shows that the school systems have not complied with that constitutional mandate. But I will say that in the minds of the folks that brought the litigation initially was an understanding that if we say that you have a right to a sound basic education, but your child is coming to school, you can't afford for the optician to get them glasses that they need so they can't see the blackboard. If they can't come to school already having breakfast, shouldn't the school system also be looking at how to address those needs if addressing those needs is part of what you have to do to get a sound basic education? And so this notion that the school system, education can't begin to solve the poverty problems. It's interesting to me because it resonates with what I've heard a lot. I co-chair a state-based task force on racial equity and criminal justice. And as we've undergone this work to try to end racial disparities in the criminal justice system, we hear the same refrain, that it's poverty, it's lack of educational opportunities, it's lack of good housing, it's lack of good jobs, it's lack of good health care. That's what ultimately results in these racial disparities in the criminal justice system. And so it just strikes me that it seems like we can go institution to institution to institution and say, well, there's all these social determinants of disparities, and yet I feel like those institutions also have to take on the mantle of solving the problems that they're confronted with. And the final thing I just want to add is I really think it is so important, whether we're talking about kids in K through 12, high school, college, wherever we're talking about the educational opportunities, that we can look at the hurdles and the challenges that some students may have, but let's also look at the resources that they have. Let's look at, whether it's they've figured out, they're resourceful, they figured out how to survive, they've figured out how to persist. Like we think too much of them as deficits, and we don't remember all of the incredible assets and other types of capital that they have that we should lift up and build on as part of the way to increasing opportunities.
Thank you so much. So two of you work primarily in an international context, and I think it would be really interesting to think about how you think about the questions of opportunity and access in your work as well. And particularly given your connections to American higher education, I think thinking a little bit about why creating global citizens in our college classrooms here also matters. So do you want to get us started on this one, Rebecca?
Thank you. Yes, and of course, Phil has many more years of experience with this, so let me start. At the school that we have, in some ways, it's exactly the project that Williams has, which is how do we provide the education that we have? How do we make it accessible to as many people as possible? And there it comes to wide recruitment, to looking at different types of learning profiles, but basically to addressing the inequity, the difference in equitable resources, so making that available independent of financial circumstances if possible. So in some ways, although it's so far away and such a new school, it really is the same conversation that we have here. And then when we have a student enter, it's the same conversation that we have here about making every student feel that that place is their home. Because only if a student feels that they belong in a place, that it truly belongs to them, as opposed to they have come in from the outside, can then take the risks, really lean into the work, and take advantage of the education the full way. So the work that Williams has done in terms of understanding the differences that people bring and really responding to that is similar to what we do. If you compare it more on a global scale, of course, global differences in resources is, to your point, it's a huge problem. So what we're talking about here is really working within our lanes to tend to the students that come to us. Those are, or as you put it, to really provide an enrichment opportunity in a moment you're not addressing the broader problems. In terms of creating global citizens, I think that is really almost self-evident at this point. I mean, it's a world that boundaries are disappearing in. It's very interesting to me when I'm abroad. I mean, Phil, you referred to anti-American sentiment. I don't feel that at all. But I do understand how the rest of the world is shifting, and it's no longer an American world or a bipolar world, but really a multipolar world. And to the extent that we want to defend American values, which I do think are unique and worth defending and worth discussing and sharing, it's on us to really understand where the rest of the world is coming from, and that really only comes from global citizenry, both here at Williams in terms of admitting students from around the world, and again, not just students from elite corners, but students who may have come to here from backgrounds that we would recognize as different, so that perspective is represented here. And similarly, for students around the world to be able to understand and share in either ways through exchange program, it really is a world in which we will have to solve together huge issues from climate to migration. Populations are moving around. Other countries are going to be the sources of demographic growth when countries in the West and now the US as well will have falling birth rates. So there's a lot of questions that we can only address together. In order to do that without, in a peaceful and productive way, we really do have to have a much better understanding and respect for where we are all coming from, and that is really the reason for promoting global citizenry.
Thank you. Phil.
It's so well put. I'm not sure I can say much more. I would say that the opportunity for let me put it this way. The United World College Schools, of which there are 18 around the world, 160 voluntary committees around the world that hand select these kids who get scholarships to go to these places, and then where do they go afterward? We're talking about, in many ways, including Williams College, sort of a drop in the larger big bucket, but we think we are outsized in impact in many ways. So is the juice worth the squeeze? I hope. The idea being, yes, let's populate American institutions with more non-Americans, but look at it globally. The United World College Schools are non-majority based places. This is not a binary conversation at a United World College Schools between the advantaged and the disadvantaged, or the white and the black, or any number of other polarities you might want to pick. So the idea of infusing, at least our idea and the resources we're putting behind it, is to bring into the conversation, broaden that conversation on diversity to all flavors in the United States and throughout the world. And so in doing that, we believe that we are equipping, in our case, at the majority population at a place like Williams College or the others we're working with, is that the global competency, the cultural skills, the listening skills, the ability to function in a world beyond your neighborhood, these are critical for everybody. So anyway, we contribute in some small trickling way to that. I want to add about the domestic scene that the work we're doing with these 100 colleges and universities, and we're putting a lot of money into the bottom quintile, a lot of stateless and refugee populations are now coming through the United World College Schools and ending up at places like Williams. But one of the things that's happening domestically that's really hopeful, in spite of legalities and systems blockages, are what are often referred to as community-based organizations. So the voluntary side, the supplementary side to the system are organizations that are doing great work giving upward mobility opportunities for a lot of kids in a lot of communities. And we see this firsthand where we live in New Mexico now. And the University of Chicago has taken a lead, along with Williams and many other schools, in looking at both rural populations and other underrepresented populations besides the ones that we're talking about mostly in the wake of the affirmative action ruling. So I believe that Williams and its other elite institutions have a great opportunity to exploit those. And I think Phil Smith gets a lot of credit globally for finding community-based organizations that fed into Williams over years that I benefited from classmates and since. But those community-based organizations throughout this country need to be more empowered, feeding into primarily the public school systems. I don't know whether you're seeing that in any advantage, but in my conversations with admissions officers across this country, if you will, circumvent the affirmative action limitations now on checking a certain box, being able to craft essays or whatever the issues may be to try to find and offer opportunity to others who wouldn't otherwise have it because of the limitations the SCOTUS ruling has now put on it. I see a lot of opportunity for circumventing all those limitations through these community-based organizations. So I'm very hopeful about that part.
Thank you. Did you want to speak to that at all? Or anybody else? No. Okay. Then let me ask one more question, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. And it really just does leap from your last comment, Phil. So, which is here at Williams, we often talk about the importance of bringing diversity to our campuses. And the recent Supreme Court decision, as well as in many legislative bodies across the country, it appears that diversity work is being very heavily challenged. So I was just wondering if maybe all of you could quickly just say a little bit about what you see as the value of diversity in the work that you do. And if you think in those terms, you all work in rather different ways with regard to the educational system. So I'd just really be interested to hear you reflect on that. And Phil, I don't know if you want to start since you ended there. It might be a natural segue. I'll just go down the line, warning you. So,
it's so obvious to me that diversity creates opportunities for all of us, not just for the individuals who are dispossessed.
Oh, use your mic, Phil.
Sorry. Simply saying that it's obvious, I think, to all of us that diversity creates more educational opportunities for everyone, not just the individuals who've been out of it, but those brought into it are actually enhancing the learning, not just for themselves, but for all of us who had privileges beforehand. So I can't tell you how grateful I am for the opportunities that we have in what we're doing by creating a more diverse community along American campuses, because they trickle outside the campus. The getaway host family concept is so prevalent now that our biggest cohort of students from all around the world is at the University of Oklahoma. We have 320 kids from 100 countries. They are all getting homestays in the red states. This is a big deal. It's microcosmic, it's a drop in the bucket, but we got to work every day with individuals and make things happen. So, it's not going to happen top down. We're getting disrupted top down. So we got to work from the bottom up.
Thank you. Anita?
So I would say that in thinking about the value of diversity, there's an element of it that is about equity. And I would also say that there's an element of it that you have to do it right. It's not simply bringing together diverse people, but you have to create conditions in which they can truly contribute on a level playing field. But the final thing I'll say, since I'm a lawyer, let me give you some evidence about the value of diversity in the legal system. And my evidence would come from studies of juries, mock juries, and I can't give you all the details of how the researchers set this up. But what they concluded was that when you had diverse juries, they more often came to the right answer, and the value of having people from different perspectives. 12 people sit in a room evaluating evidence that they heard in a courtroom. The research shows that when you have a diverse jury, you get better outcomes.
Thank you. Bob?
I think from my perspective, obviously, diversity is hugely important. It was important at Williams. It's important in workplaces. It's important in pre-K to 12 schools. We learn more. We value difference. We understand that the world has all kinds of people, and we need to be able to, as a democracy, have respect for each other and coexist and thrive really as a multiracial, very diverse population. This country is an experiment. We really are one of the few countries where society hasn't developed solely along sort of a monoculture, monolanguage, even or really that according to a standard religion, let's say. So the experiment and democracy is not something that we can take lightly or sort of disregard or take for granted. Democracy is not self-perpetuating, as we've sort of come to realize more and more, I think, over the past few years. It really takes a lot of work. So diversity is important, and I guess my one observation about it is that what's happening recently is that there's not only a lack of appreciation for diversity, but really there's efforts to not even allow discussion about diversity. Discussion about sort of aspects of diversity in education, in libraries. And I think that that's where we have to get really worried and do what we can to counter those efforts, because it goes beyond just diversity and numbers. It goes into thought and being able to speak freely, to be able to learn and be exposed to things. Once you start shrinking that or insisting on shrinking it and shrinking away from diversity, it's deeply anti-intellectual, it's deeply anti-democratic, and we need to be concerned about that. And so that's kind of why advocacy, I think you can tell, is in my bones. I really, really think that these are important things to talk and work about.
Thank you,
work
Rebecca.
in.
So I definitely agree with all of that. And I think diversity in DEI really has taken on so many meanings. And this type of diversity, to me, it's just a necessity, right? It's really acknowledging all of our differences and allowing us all to flourish. What I would add also is that there is huge opportunity and hugely exciting. And the way I've thought about it, I served as chair of the DEI committee at Brearley, my girls' school in New York, post George Floyd. And that was just a ton of work, but really interesting, because what it means, or the way I've always thought about it, is what is the world we would create if we were all there on day one? What are the systems that we would design? And what that does is invite all of us who are lifelong learners, right? That's what we took away from Williams, to really think fundamentally, what would we do? So to Anita's point earlier, would we think about admissions in terms of the characteristics of resilience and perseverance? Must we accept sort of the frameworks that we've had, or do we want to think about what that means? In terms of the curriculum, another example that I can give is, again, Brearley is a little bit like Williams. It's got a lot of resources and it's protected, but the type of work that we were able to do with curriculum as traditional as Latin, or of course English, is really revamping it, and you realize there's a million ways to bring in inclusivity without losing a thing in terms of academic excellence. And it's just exciting because it's access to a whole new world. So if you can get past the threat, certainly, for some people, understandably, it does look like a loss when you come at it. If you view it in terms of like, no, this is truly allowing you to see the whole wide world that you hadn't seen before, for me, it's exciting and just opens up a world of possibility.
Thank you. Matthew.
It is a thrill to sit up here with you smart people. In our world, publishing, children's publishing in general has been dominated by white male mainstream voices for decades and centuries. So children's publishers are making many efforts now to diversify the voices of the offerings, the subject matter of the books, so that there are stories that more readers can relate to. There are very compelling data to say that if you haven't, established strong skills of reading and literacy by 4th grade, your prospects in life are dramatically diminished. Books, stories, reading are all part of our intellectual and emotional development. And if you are not able to connect with a book, to connect with a story, because those stories are not available, the stories you can relate to, your chance of becoming a reader and becoming connected to those opportunities is a lot lower. We've had the opportunity on our trip to, in addition to the books we are giving away, there's an organization called First Book that has devoted the last 30 years to providing books to low-income Title I communities. They partnered with Build-A-Bear Foundation, and we gave away 125,000 books by other creators through First Book. And First Book has a very thoughtfully curated library of 4,000 books that represent the widest variety of viewpoints and backgrounds and cultures and traditions. And so teachers in the community could purchase books that their students could relate to. And that's such an important part of this equation of getting kids to think about reading. Our school in North Carolina, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
you tell that story.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was an all-black school in North Carolina, and the picture book we were giving away happens to have a brown-skinned character on the cover. And watching these kids come into the auditorium clutching their books and saying, "Oh, this guy looks like me," sort of with surprise and delight. It was just, we all know that it's important to be able to relate to the books that you're reading, but to be able to see it, to really be able to see it and have that firsthand evidence of how important that is. Anyway, Robbie, what were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say I have a very tiny example of how meaningful diversity can be. So I think we were in a school in Oklahoma, and in each of the schools we went to, we had a small group session where we met with 10 to 12 of the kids and had lunch with them and chatted with them, and we asked that we not get their academic superstars. We asked that we get sort of the kids that are cutting up in the back of the room or that need a little extra attention. So we always had a fun group of kids. And so we asked them 3 questions on this worksheet. The first question was an easy one. What is your favorite meal? Describe your favorite meal. The second one was, what makes you happiest? And the third one was, if you were in charge, what would you change or do?
Would you do or change to make the world better for others?
To make the world better for everyone. And so we would go around and look at their worksheets, and I'd chat with them, and then I'd sign something in their book. And this little boy had written in the third one, he said, this was always an amazing reflection of the things that kids are absorbing from their families and from where they're coming from. So his answer was, I would make electric cars illegal and only have gas cars. This was in Oklahoma. So I was like, oh man, I was like, why? I was like, I'm so excited to get my first electric car. I can't wait till they come down in price so that I can get an electric car. I'm super psyched. And it was obviously the first time that he had ever heard anyone say, there's something exciting about electric cars. And so I was like, well, why do you have to get rid of my electric car? Can't we both have cars? You can have your gas car and I can have my electric car. And he was like, oh, I guess you can. And that it just was not, it was something obviously that somebody had been railing about at home. These darn electric cars are ruining everything. And if that tiny little moment for that kid, I could see his brain just turn on and be like, oh yeah, that's okay. I don't have to be like
This
that.
woman is making a reasonable argument.
Yes. So that is just on the base level. That's just diversity of exposure to other ideas. That's not even all of the amazing diversity that we're talking about, cultural diversity, racial diversity, all of the things that all of you fine people are taking care of and doing good things. There's diversity in the tiniest things, just exposing kids and people and adults to more different ideas, and that they can come from people who are not like you, but who are likable people. So of course diversity is the most important thing.
Thank you. On that note, I think we'll throw it open to the audience. So if you could raise your hand, I'll take a question, and then I'll repeat your question so that everybody can hear it in case you didn't. I'll start with a student.
Wow. Thank you for being here today. My name is Christopher Flores. I'm the class of 2026, so I'm a sophomore right now. And as I've been hearing you out, my mind has been jumping from tangent to tangent, trying to figure out where to even start, because originally I'm very honored that we have a justice here from the North Carolina Supreme Court, because I really love math, I really love data, I really love politics. I actually spent this summer working for the House of Representatives because I want to be fighting for the right to vote, the right to be represented. And whether that's through healthcare, through elections, or whatever it may be, that's what drove me there. But as I hear you all out, especially talking about education and poverty, I just want you to know I'm very grateful that I am being seen on this stage, because I am an immigrant. I'm actually going to Boston next month to go get my immigrant interview done. And I'm also the son of a working mother who was single. And again, just want to say thank you for just doing everything you're doing. And I see that you've been doing this for decades. And it gives me hope, because, going back home to Arizona, especially rural Arizona, where it's hard to find opportunity. It's hard sometimes, and I just want to say thank you, just first and foremost. And now,
Yes. First of all, you're amazing for being here. So congratulations to you, and bless you for just embracing it all and doing it all. You are amazing, and you're the reason why we do it all, genuinely. Yep.
I also wanted to highlight the community-based organizations that I came from one of those as well. The STEP program in Arizona actually sent me to Alaska after a few 2 years of college prep, and it was one of the greatest, most transformative experiences in my life. So with all this to say is just that without a lot of these efforts, I wouldn't be here at Williams today, and I just want to ask, now that we're seeing that students like myself who have come from so many different backgrounds, now that we're getting through the other side, how are you empowering them to also be part of these conversations, to be at the tables? Because when I was at the House of Representatives, I was able to be sitting right next to senators and representatives, and I had to just bite my tongue and not be able to say anything. And I really appreciated that my friends had the opportunities with their bosses and employers to really bring their voices to the table. So I just want to ask, what are you doing to do the same for people like me that are now coming through the other side?
Thank you. I'm not going to repeat that. I hope everybody heard it. I wouldn't even try, but thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to throw it to the panel. Someone want to go first?
I'll say one thing first, which is that the ball is in your court. We don't have the answers for you, and we haven't done it for you. You and others have done it for yourselves, and the other side is where you're at, and the fact that you won't keep your mouth shut in the future is the best option.
Hear, hear. Are there other responses or anything anyone wants to add?
I wish I had something to tell you. I have been sort of involved in our local politics in this fight for the kids in our local school system, and it's hard for me. I've been doing it for years, and I've made no progress. My hope is that the platform that I've gotten by doing this project will encourage the people in my local community to start listening to me, and that might give me a voice. But it's hard, and I don't know if the answer is to get people to vote. I don't know if the answer is to run for office. I don't know if the answer is to sit next to that person and not shut up. Like, I really don't know what the answer is, and I'm sorry that I don't know what the answer is. And I have so much hope for your generation to do it better than we did.
You seem to be a person of enthusiasm, spirit, mission, heart, purpose. You keep charging with those factors at the forefront, and you're going to be able to succeed, my friend. You're very impressive in this room, standing up in front of all these people and speaking your mind. I believe in you deeply, and keep going. You're going to make us all proud.
Thank you. I'll take a question over here.
I have a sort of partial answer for him, and if he develops University of kindergartners from birth to 7 years of age, I think he's going to succeed very easily. The reason I'm going to be mentioning this is I've studied with the kids, children's brain all my life, and so that I'm going to just make it brief. Brief known of my neurodevelopment of a kid's brain. When babies born, they are born, let's say, with around 2 billion of neurons, which develops a double or triple by the time they get 2 years of age. From 2 to 7 years of age, all newly developed neurons has to be synaptized to develop for their future educations and so on. On the basis of those, people will have 7 areas of intelligence, which I'm not going to just go by. But one of the human beings' good education becomes because of people's education and people's communication skills, which is making one person to learn from the other person and so on. So we talked about all luxury of education from K to 12 and the Williams, Harvard educations and all that, but that's luxury. But if we don't do something until they reach 7 years of age, it's going to be so tough for that person to be a productive person in our future. So for that particular student, I think I would strongly advocate for him to develop University of Kindergarten, University 7, then you're going to be achieving great deal.
Thank you. Once again, I'm not going to try to repeat that. I think people heard you, but the emphasis should be on the very, very earliest years as a way to create access and opportunity. Thank you.
Williams needs to open a new
Yeah, right.
new
We have a
branch.
child care center, actually. Don't get me started. Okay. Are there other questions or comments in the room? Yeah, please.
I'm just going to follow up with this gentleman's comment. I think what he's getting at is not just giving kids books to read, but the neurodevelopmental process is very important, and reading to kids before they can read themselves helps generate that cognitive ability, that interest, and sets the landscape. So I don't know if you guys are doing books to kids, to families, and not only for the kids, but for the parents or somebody else, the caregivers, to read to the kids.
I think what I can say about this particular age group is that we did this research study with Washington College in our hometown, and they're still working on the data. They collected surveys from about 5,000 students and teachers across the country, about 12,000 data points. They surveyed them before our assembly, they surveyed them after our assembly, and then they did a month later delayed survey to see how attitudes were changed regarding reading, writing, and drawing, because we addressed all those things in our assemblies. We tried to encourage students to see their own power as storytellers, that their own lives were worth reflecting about, connecting with others through storytelling. And it's too early to get too specific about the data, but in all three categories, reading, writing, and drawing, there were statistically meaningful bumps in engagement in all the age groups, but the bumps were more striking for the younger kids. For the pre-K through first graders, it was more, demonstrably more than the second through fifth graders. So if that does anything to back up what you're saying, I don't know, but.
But another thing that we found interesting, in a couple of the schools we went to, we also were in the communities long enough that we did an evening program with the families.
A family engagement.
A family engagement night. So that was in Hawaii and in our school in the Grand Canyon, which meant that we got to meet the families. And one of the things we talked about what we had talked to the kids about, and a lot of the parents said, "Oh my gosh, my kids came home so excited to read. I'm so excited." We had told them about reading buddies, so these teddy bears that we give away. There's also evidence that if a child reads to a
pet or a stuffed animal.
Or a stuffed animal that's non-judgmental, not going to make them feel bad about it, that they succeed, that they have a closer connection to reading, that they're more interested in doing it. So that was part of the giveaway of the bears. So a lot of the parents, after that parent engagement night, the principal of that school wrote to us and said one of the biggest pieces of feedback that we got was that they were so excited to hear about this Reading Buddies thing, so that they could help implement that at home, which would have a much longer trailing effect than anything that we do in the one day that we're there. So our hope is the next time we do this, because we do think that we're going to do it again, is to combine a family engagement night with it, so that we can help parents understand, because a lot of parents who haven't grown up in a reading in sort of a reading environment don't know that that is such a crucial thing to pass on to their kids. They want what's best for their kids for the most part, right? So, so just a little bit of awareness there, I think we're hoping will have a longer trailing effect than what we can do.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Yes, please.
The fact that you're here and that we're having this conversation is hopeful and is a shift for me. I've been profoundly depressed by the education savage inequalities that Bob led with, and some of the written issues. In my state of Vermont, been working, and yet seeing that the almost quasi-religious sanctity around local control, and that local control is increasingly seized by a vocal and determined minority, perhaps, that don't represent this. And then you look at that again through the lens of Desmond's book on Poverty by America, and you see the legal, the systemic, the social, the economic fabric that is wired against closing that inequality gap. community-based organizations maybe, Phil, but how do you stay hopeful in the face of the awareness?
I have to say,
I'm just going to quickly repeat the question. I don't know if everybody heard. Just the base question is, how do you stay hopeful in the face of all the shifting terrain, which seems to work in not increasing equity of educational opportunity? Do you want to start?
Well, I was just going to say that I also, before we left on this trip, was very down on the people of this country and just people. I was like, people are terrible. So we left on this trip, and I thought that we were going to be going into these schools, seeing a lot of the worst of education, a lot of the headlines that we hear. These teachers are failing these kids, these communities are failing these kids. We found the complete opposite. The teachers that are in these schools are there because they love the kids. They know that they're the only people who are going to show up for these kids in some cases. It genuinely, like, I get emotional about it because these people restored my faith in humanity. And so I would say, going into these schools, meeting these kids, recognizing that they're great kids. There are no bad kids. There are no bad kids. We saw them all at their best, and their best was amazing. So what gives me hope is that in spite of all of the things that they are up against, we have you showing up at Williams College. Like, that gives me hope. And if we separate ourselves and we say, this is a problem that other people have to deal with, it is not my problem, this child is not my problem, then we are giving ourselves over to hopelessness. We say to that kid, you are somebody worth seeing and worth doing something for, and that's where I find my hope. And I'm so grateful for you for standing up and for being here, because that's absolutely what makes me do it. So yes.
Thank you.
That's what I would say.
Does anybody else on the panel want to speak of your sources of optimism?
I will just.
Go ahead.
I will just add, what is the alternative? Despair. So that's not what we want. And I also think that those of us who have had the luxury of a Williams College education and so much other privilege, we just don't get to give up. We really don't. I mean, yes. I really feel that is, when I spoke earlier about service and how we choose to leave our, so personally for me, I just don't think I get to do that. So it's a combination of staying hopeful and finding a meaningful life of service that keeps me going. And then, there's always tons of moments of joy as well, right? I mean, we're up here with this amazing panel. We'll have students like you to meet. And you interact with young people and you see that they are the future. So I don't think we're called on. I don't think we're not going to solve every problem, but I don't think that that's what we're called on. We're called on to equip people around us to be their best selves, which was part of the reason the diversity is so compelling, right? If we could really pull everybody into this conversation and give them what they need, and if we can do our part in a small lane. I think if you look at the big lane, I agree, it's very hard, but that doesn't mean you can't make a real difference in the range of spaces that you act in.
I need to take cool lessons from Rebecca. I gotta be a little cooler about it.
Phil,
and I'm sure I could learn a little hot from you, so that could go both ways.
I wake up hopeful almost every day because there are thousands of kids becoming young adults who've been given access and opportunity, who are going to assume responsibility for things that we haven't done a very good job with. So the data is depressing. The big picture is difficult. I would shrink, and I really like your comment about scale and shrinking problems to individual responsibility. So if there is hope, Nick, then the hope is in the individuals who are byproducts of places like Williams and elsewhere.
Thank you. Anita?
Yeah, so sitting on the court, I see, particularly in our criminal justice cases, but also in cases involving termination of parental rights, all sorts of cases where young people, whether it's juvenile delinquency cases, I sort of feel this daily weight of all the ways in which we've failed, the young people and the folks who then are ending up in those systems. And of course, our hope is in the future, but I guess what gives me the ability to keep going is remembering the people whose shoulders I stand on. And so I think of Julius Chambers, who is dead now, but is a civil rights attorney who I had the privilege of working with. And when he was doing his civil rights work, his car was firebombed, his house was firebombed, his law office was burnt. So I have in my chambers at the court some of the books that are singed from when the law office was burned. And for me, that's a reminder that whatever challenges I personally have to face to do this work, I haven't been firebombed yet. And so I remember the courage and the vision and the heart of those who came before me.
Thank you. Do you want to weigh in, Bob? You think you're the last word?
There's hope in knowing that there are people who who use the tools that they've been given from education, like places like here. You know, we come away with a set of skills. We know how to think critically. We know how to write. We know how to speak. We know how to listen, and we develop a moral sense too for what's right and for what's wrong. You know, through our education, and I have great hope that because I see people coming out of institutions like here, but really all around the country, who are in the trenches, who are doing work for the common good. And they're really inspirational, and they include students too. Students are an integral part of convincing adults that their lives matter. And in some cases, students, their perspective and their voice is heard even more than those of, you know, talking heads like me who go into offices and sometimes are not that effective in delivering what we want to say. But so I think I have hope that the people that I know and see who are in the trenches working for the common good, for the students and the youth who are coming up, who are developing these skills and putting them to good use, that is something really unique about this country that I think, you know, what was the saying? The arc of moral the moral arc is long, but it sort of bends toward justice. You know, there will be times when we don't feel like we're getting toward justice, but it does bend there, and it's with help of people, lots of people, both adults and younger students as well.
Thank you so much. So we've come to the end of our time together. I hope you'll join me in celebrating this wonderful group of medalists. Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you all for coming.